Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So this one we're going to look at the Codex Vaticanus, and we've done that in previous videos where I've broken down a bunch of different passages from the Codex Vaticanus to show you the differences compared to the Byzantine text, which we've looked at before as well. Now in this one we're going to look at what it says here. Angelo Mai, his version of the Codex Vaticanus when he copied it out, and he was a cardinal and a philologist. So he knew ancient Greek and how to write it out and exactly what he was doing. We're going to look at what it says and why his version was later thrown out really for a newer version. And we're going to take a look at the two different texts, and you tell me which one looks more like a philologist and someone who knows actual ancient Greek wrote, or the version of a biblical scholar who doesn't actually know how to use the language. First off, who is Angelo Mai? This is his portrait. Angelo Mai here on Wikipedia says he was an Italian cardinal and philologist. He won a European reputation for publishing for the first time a series of previously unknown ancient texts. These he was able to discover and publish first while in charge of the Ambrosian Library in Milan, and then in the same role at the Vatican Library. Okay, so he was in a role at the Vatican Library where he was publishing ancient texts. In 1799, he entered the Society of Jesus, and in 1804, he became a teacher of classics in the College of Naples. So he taught classics. So this dude's a philologist and a classics teacher. So he knows exactly what he's doing with this Greek text, the Codex Vaticanus. Now, key point here, later on, he left the Society of Jesus, or withdrew from it, and then he was invited to Rome in 1819 as chief keeper of the Vatican Library. This philologist and cardinal was held in such high esteem in the Vatican, he was the chief keeper of the Vatican Library. This is his standing in the Vatican, alright? And then in 1833, he was transferred to the office of Secretary of Congregation of Propaganda. But they didn't release his version of the Codex Vaticanus until he was dead. So posthumously, they released it. Now, let's take a look at what it says about his edition of the Codex Vaticanus, because if he was the chief keeper of the Vatican Library and then he went into the propaganda department, this is interesting. His edition of the celebrated Codex Vaticanus, completed in 1838 but not published, ostensibly on the ground of inaccuracies. He taught classics, he knew ancient Greek, he was a philologist, the keeper of the Vatican Library, and he was in the propaganda department in the Vatican. But there were inaccuracies. So they released it 4 years after his death in 1858. And it says, is the least satisfactory of his labors, and was superseded by the addition of Versiloni and Cosa, which itself leaves much to be desired. But I found, when I was doing this research, that another person, Konstantin von Tischendorf, who's a German biblical scholar, did another edition, and it says in 1867. Which is the year before this. Now, if you are a philologist and someone who taught classics, you know how to read this and you know what you're going to do with this text and how to read it and how to write it, being Angelo Mai, a cardinal. Now, there's these little things here which I wanted to get to, which I'll show you. Now, it's a little iota sigma. We know from right here, we've seen this before. That's the shorter version for saying Iesu Christo, Jesus Christ. And we're going to have a look at how Angelo Mai puts it in his edition, and how Tischendorf puts it in his edition, someone who's a biblical scholar compared to someone who's a classical philologist. And let's not forget that the Codex Vaticanus, still on the AI, says it's one of the most important and oldest extant 4th century manuscripts of the Greek Bible. It is a critical, high-quality text that serves as a cornerstone for modern translations of the New Testament and Septuagint. But we just read Wikipedia that says Angelo Mai's edition was not published on the grounds of inaccuracies. So let's take a look at the inaccuracies we're talking about, because if a philologist is doing inaccuracies and they need a rewritten text to do it again because he had inaccuracies, then what can we get from a Bible scholar? Because right here we'll see Luke 3:23 with the IC here, iota sigma. Now this is what Angelo Mai does. He says Iesus, which is the name of Jesus. He doesn't put iota sigma. So he puts Iesus. Now what does Tischendorf put, a biblical scholar? You can see here he uses iota sigma, but he uses a normal sigma from ancient Greek. If you know anything about ancient Greek, you do not use the normal sigma for the end of a word, a terminal sigma. And you can see it here, he's done it multiple times. The autos has a sigma at the end. Now this is a biblical scholar doing this. okay? Not a philologist. And he's put normal sigmas where the terminal sigma, an actual S, is looking supposed to be. I'm going to show you what I mean, because it says Kai apokryphes, and now we have a sigma at the end that looks like a normal English S. That's a terminal sigma you put at the end of a word. Tischendorf is using, see this sigma here with the sindona? He's using this kind of sigma at the end of a word, which is not what you do in ancient Greek. So if the Vatican is saying, hey, the dude we had as our propaganda machine and who was head of the Vatican Library, they're saying his is wrong and it's based on inaccuracies, so they had to redo it and have someone else do it, which they say on Wikipedia, the people who rewrote it or redid it, it was still a lot left to be desired. But then you have a look at another one, which is a biblical scholar who's doing this, Tischendorf, in 1857 it said. And what does his look like? Look at this. There are no accents over any of the letters, whereas you see with Angelo Mai, look, he's a philologist, so look, he puts the accents over the letters, he put the breathing over the letters where they're supposed to be, he puts the iota subscript under lei stais, which it's what it says because he knows it's trisyllabic and you put the iota subscript, so it's lei stais. So he knows what he's doing. And he's got neoniskos here. So this is Mark 1448 to 52. Neoniskos, he's got the sigma there in the middle, which is supposed to be. And then he's got a terminal sigma at the end and another terminal sigma. And then, so this guy is a philologist and knows what he's doing. He's a cardinal. And then we have a biblical scholar who has a rewrite. And this is the level of ancient Greek a biblical scholar uses. The same passage. Leistain. He has no iota subscript where the lei stais is. He has no rough breathing, smooth breathing, nothing, no accents over any of the letters. And this is a biblical scholar. So I know which one I would trust over the one the Vatican doesn't want you to read apparently now because there's too many inaccuracies. But the most important thing I think for me that I've seen here again and again, now this is where in the Byzantine text we see sabachthani, but in the Codex Vaticanus we see zaba Fawani. Now it looks like an omicron here with another omicron just at the end of the word, at the end of the line. What actually does it say in the other versions by Angelo Mai and Tischendorf? And why is it that it's hard to understand with what it's saying? Because it should be a theta, so there should be a line in the middle. But we don't really see that in the Vaticanus. I'll show you a few more, but let's take a look at what Angelo Mai says about this part here in the Codex Vaticanus. Lama sabachthani. What does he say? Now this is Mai's version. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthane. Sabachthane. He's saying it is a phi and then a theta, not an omicron. So he's saying lama sabachthane in Mark. Now, if we look at it in Matthew, it's sabachthane with a kappa and a tau. But in this one right here, sabachthane. Now, what does Tischendorf say? Now, this one's a bit harder to see, but you can see there's a zeta, alpha, beta, alpha, phi, and then a tall theta, alpha, nu, epsilon, iota. So it says the same thing, sabachthane. So we have two people now who are writing sabachthane from the Codex Vaticanus. Now, why is it so hard for Vaticanus? Now, this is Mark 16, where there is the other neoniskos in the tomb, which we looked at before. But you see with the Codex Vaticanus, we'll show you right here. So here, neoniskon. So you can see that is an alpha here up the top, line up here, neoniskon. Now, that is another alpha here, kath, and that's another theta there, but they don't use the line with the theta, so it can be confusing because then there's an omicron and then another one, another omicron. So it looks the same. An omicron and a theta are kind of looking the same. Now we have it down here in the third line, first letter. This looks like another alpha, or it could be a lambda, but we know in other texts it's a delta because the delta, bottom line, so it looks like a triangle, and you know that's a D, a delta. So that's dexios. But you can be confused if you don't know what it says and you're reading this and you're like, is this an alpha or a lambda or a delta? Could be multiple different things. So whoever was writing the Codex Vaticanus originally, it looks like, I don't know, just lazy. And they don't want to put the line through the omicron to make it a theta, and they don't want to put the line at the bottom of a delta to make it look like a delta. So it's, you just got to know what you're reading. But it just seems like lazy to me to whoever was writing the Vaticanus to not finish off their work and to write whatever. And then to say that a cardinal / philologist and your head of the Vatican Library is making inaccuracies, when good luck reading this shit if you don't know what you're doing. As I've shown before, when the Vatican allowed later scholars to look at this text, they were saying, this is strange, this is so out of place, like it says things that it's very odd, and it's not what the other text we've been looking at says. They just kind of dismissed it because it was so different. And these are textual scholars. And I'm just showing you the differences in a philologist who is a cardinal and a biblical scholar who is writing this out, who doesn't know where to put the accents on any of the letters or how to actually write Greek. He's just copying it out, and he knows how to copy it out and what letters are, but he doesn't know where to put any of these accents over the words, over the letters. I know whose edition I would follow. I would go with Angelo Mai's over a biblical scholar who doesn't know how to write Greek properly. And it's very strange that the Vatican would kind of just push this aside and hush hush for Angelo Mai's edition when he was chief keeper of the Vatican Library in 1819 when he was invited to Rome. And then in 1833, he was transferred to the office of the Secretary of Congregation of Propaganda for the propagation of the faith. Yeah, propaganda. It's very interesting that the Vatican would try and push this aside, hush hush this Angelo Mai edition, when it's someone who's a studied scholar and who's a teacher of ancient Greek in classics and is a philologist. With all these ancient Greek biblical texts, there is so much work to do that I'm never going to be able to do it and get through all this stuff. I'm just picking out some of the most interesting things that I think that I'm like, hey, this doesn't quite line up. This doesn't really make sense. And I'm just bringing it to your attention to be like, hey, you guys can look into it for yourselves. And if you find more, please send it to me or make your own videos or do your own research, because the story we've been told just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. And that's not just me saying that. That's scholars who've looked at the text, the Vaticanus I'm talking about, and other scholars who are like, hey, this doesn't make sense. It sits out of place. It doesn't sit and align with everything else we're reading. So it's just curious that the Vatican, with the Codex Vaticanus, are pushing aside this edition from someone who seems pretty high up in the Vatican and says it's got inaccuracies. But the editions that they release after, it still says there's much left to be desired. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below.